She said it over the phone, not even in person. "Dad, we think it's time for you to step back from the board, permanently." I was standing at the kitchen window in my house in Oakville, watching the neighbor's dog dig up the corner of the garden, same as he did every Thursday morning. My coffee had gone cold. I don't know why I remember the coffee, but I do. My daughter had become president of Callaway Bridge Capital 3 days earlier. I had voted for her myself. "There's also the matter of the consulting agreement," she continued, voice smooth the way it gets when she's already decided something and is simply informing you of it. "We'll be transitioning those services in-house. Legal will send the paperwork." I looked at the coffee cup, a chip along the rim. I'd been meaning to throw it out for 2 years. "All right," I said. There was a pause. I think she expected something else. "Dad, I heard you, sweetheart." I said, "All right." When I set the phone down on the counter, I stood there for a moment in the particular quiet of a house where you've lived alone for 4 years since your wife passed. It wasn't shock. It wasn't even hurt, exactly. It was recognition, the way you recognize weather changing before the clouds arrive. You feel it in the joints first. Her name is Sylvie. She's 41 years old, and she looks so much like her mother it used to stop my breath on the bad mornings. She has a mother's precision too. The way she can walk into a room and take it apart before she sat down. I always admired that in her. I still do, even now. What she didn't know, and what I had no reason yet to tell her, was that the consulting agreement she was transitioning in-house wasn't really mine to give back. I'm 63. I spent 30 years building Callaway Bridge from a regional brokerage into a mid-market capital firm that manages close to $2 billion in assets under administration. That number still sounds strange to me. In 1994, I was cold calling from a desk the size of a cutting board in a strip mall office in Burlington. My son-in-law, Sylvie's husband, a man named Owen, had been circling the board chair position for the better part of 2 years. He's smart, I'll give him that. An MBA from Rotman, good instincts for optics, the kind of face that photographs well for annual reports. What he doesn't have and has never had is patience for the machinery underneath. He wants the results without the blueprint. That was always the difference between us. When Sylvie first brought Owen into the firm 6 years ago, I didn't object. She was VP of strategy then, doing well. And she said she needed someone who could handle the institutional client side. I said fine. I watched. I kept my opinions to the parts of the business that were mine. But I had been watching longer than either of them understood. 8 years ago, when the board first started talking about succession, I did something that at the time I described to no one except my accountant and my lawyer. A woman named Helen Park, who has handled my affairs since the mid-90s and who has, on more than one occasion, talked me out of decisions I would have regretted. I restructured the senior advisory contracts, not dishonestly, not secretly. The board approved it, the paperwork was filed, and the relevant parties all received copies of the amended agreements. But nobody reads addendums. Not really. They read the cover page and the summary and the number on the bottom line, and if the number looks right, they sign. What the addendum said, in careful and entirely legal language, was that the strategic advisory component of 7 major institutional relationships, including Dillsworth Pension Fund, Pacific Northwest Credit Union, and the Braemar Family Office, which alone represented about 40% of our recurring fee revenue, was provided under the auspices of Colborne Advisory Partners, which was me, just me, operating under a different banner, with board-approved structure and a clean paper trail. The firm could continue the administrative and compliance work on those accounts. But the relationship, the trust, the history, the reason those clients renewed year after year, that lived somewhere else. I hadn't built it as a trap. I built it because I understood something about this industry that takes most people decades to learn. Relationships are not transferable by memo. You can reassign an account. You can't reassign 30 years of someone knowing that when they call, you'll pick up. That Thursday morning after I put the phone down, I drove to the little office I keep on Lakeshore. Nothing impressive. A second-floor space above a dry cleaner, 2 rooms and a window that looks out over the lake. I unlocked the door, made a fresh coffee on the machine on the bookshelf, and I sat down at my desk and opened a folder I hadn't needed to look at in 3 years. Everything was exactly where I'd left it. I wasn't angry. I want to be clear about that, even now. I was something more like settled. The way you feel when a long flight finally lands and you can stop gripping the armrest. My phone rang. It was a man named Grant, the senior partner at Dillsworth, who has been a client of mine since before Sylvie was old enough to drive. "I got an email," he said, without hello. He does that. Grant, no preamble, no niceties. In 20 years, I have never once heard him say, "How are you?" It says Sylvie will be my new point of contact. "There have been some changes internally," I said. "Changes." He said the word the way you'd examine something found on the bottom of a shoe. "The agreement is with Colborne Advisory." It is. So Calloway's correspondence is what exactly? I'd call it optimistic. He made a sound, not a laugh, but the cousin of one. "Who do I call when I want to talk about the Q3 rebalancing?" "Same number you always called." There was a pause. "Good," he said. "I don't like change." "I know, Grant. Don't let anyone touch the fixed income allocation without talking to me first." "I won't." When the call ended, I sat looking at the lake for a long time. February in Oakville. The water was the color of old pewter, flat and cold and very still. I thought about my wife. She would have found all of this very funny, in the particular dry way she had, the raised eyebrow, the small smile, the well. You'd warn them that she was so good at. She was right about most things. She was right that I gave too much of myself to that firm and not enough to the dinner table. She was right that Sylvie needed me to let go eventually, and that I was holding on past the useful point. She was also right in the last year before she passed, when she told me one evening while we were doing the dishes, "Just make sure you're not the only one who gets hurt if it goes sideways." That's why I built Colborne. Not out of spite. Out of love for a woman who understood risk better than anyone I ever met. By the afternoon, my phone had 3 more messages. The Pacific Northwest Credit Union's Investment Committee Chair, the Braemar office manager, and a man named Ted who runs a mid-size manufacturing company in Kitchener that I've guided through 2 recessions and a complete pivot of their pension structure. None of them were calling Callaway Bridge. I returned each call in turn. I explained carefully and honestly that the advisory relationship remained intact and that any administrative transition at the firm level would not affect their strategic service continuity. Each one said some version of the same thing. "Good, because you're the reason we stayed." That's not ego. That's just the truth of this kind of work. You can brand and market all you like, but at the end of a long quarter when a client is nervous, they want to hear a voice they trust. And trust is not listed under assets on any balance sheet. My son-in-law called at 4:30. I almost didn't answer. I don't dislike Owen, which I realize sounds like something you'd say about a person you actively dislike. It's more accurate to say I have never fully trusted his read on what matters. He is excellent at the things that can be measured in a quarter, and impatient with everything else. "You should have flagged this," he said. No hello from him either, though for different reasons than Grant. Owen skips pleasantries because he considers them inefficient. Grant skips them because he's been too busy for 30 years to develop the habit. "I filed the structure with the board 8 years ago," I said. "You know what I mean." "I do," I agreed, "but I noticed you didn't ask about it before announcing that my agreements were being absorbed in-house." He was quiet for a moment. "Sylvie is going to call you. I expect she will. This doesn't have to be contentious." "No," I said, "it doesn't." When he hung up, I made a note to call Helen in the morning. Not because anything was complicated. It wasn't, but because I like to keep my lawyer informed, and also because Helen has a way of talking me through decisions that helps me understand what I actually want, as opposed to what I think I should want. What I wanted, I was beginning to understand, was not the same thing I would have wanted 10 years ago. Sylvie called at 7. I was eating leftovers at the kitchen counter. Roast chicken, reheated. The kind of thing your wife used to make properly, that you learn to do adequately after she's gone. Owen says clients are calling you directly. They are. Dad. She stopped. I could hear her working through something, that pause I've known since she was 16 years old and had to tell me she'd backed the car into the garage door. The pause where she's deciding whether to come at something straight or sideways. She usually goes straight. It's one of the things I've always respected about her. You built a structure that we didn't understand. I presented it to the board in 2016. You presented a tax efficiency proposal. You didn't explain that it meant the firm's largest relationships were contractually outside the firm. She wasn't wrong about that. I let the silence sit. Why didn't you just tell me? She asked. Would you have listened? Another pause. Longer this time. Maybe not back then, she finally admitted. That honesty landed. Sylvie has always been able to do that, admit the thing when she's cornered, not with weakness, but with a kind of straightforwardness that I like to think she got from her mother. I wasn't trying to undermine you, I said. It feels like it. I know, but there's a difference between a trap and a contingency. She was quiet again. Then, the board is asking questions I don't have answers to. I imagine they are. They want to meet. Tomorrow morning. Would you come? I thought about it. Outside, a car went by on the street, headlights sweeping across the kitchen wall. My neighbor's dog barked once, then stopped. Have Helen call them, I said. She'll represent my interests. That's not the same as you being there. No, I agreed. But it might be clearer. After we hung up, I washed the dish and the fork and left them on the rack the way I always do, and stood looking out the window for a while. The street was quiet. One of the street lamps had been flickering for a week. The city never seemed to get around to fixing the ones on this end. I thought about the first time I brought Sylvie to the office. She was maybe 9 years old. It was a Saturday and her mother had some kind of appointment, and I had paperwork that couldn't wait. She sat at the desk across from mine and drew horses in the margins of a legal pad for 2 hours without complaint. When we left, she asked me why I liked it there so much. Because I built it, I told her. From nothing? She asked. From a parking lot office in Burlington, I said. She thought about this for a moment. The way children do when they're deciding whether something is impressive or simply confusing. I'm going to build something too, she told me finally. Very seriously. The way she said everything at 9. And she did. She really did. I don't think I ever stopped being proud of her, even this week. Helen called me the next morning before I'd finished my first coffee. She'd spoken with Callaway's legal team the previous evening. They're not disputing the structure, she said. They've read it now, or their external counsel has, and they know what they're looking at. Clean, documented, board approved. I know. What they're asking is whether Colborne is willing to formalize the partnership on a go-forward basis. Long-term retainer, guaranteed minimums, the whole arrangement put above the table in plain language. What kind of numbers? She told me. I set my coffee down. That's a serious offer, I said. They're in a serious position, Helen replied. Without your relationships, they lose roughly 42% of recurring revenue. Their institutional book looks very thin very fast, and Sylvie knows it. Owen proposed this, the board proposed it, Sylvie seconded it. Owen, from what I understand, was not enthusiastic but had the good sense to understand the math. I almost smiled. Math. That great equalizer of ego. What did they say about the advisory role? Helen paused. They offered you a seat back. Not president, not board chair. Senior partner, strategic advisory, effectively your old role but under a new title. And Sylvie remains president. This isn't about replacing her. The board was very clear on that. I got up and walked to the window. The lake was visible from here on clear mornings, a thin strip of grey-blue between the rooftops. Today it was barely there, sky and water nearly the same color. "Tell them I'll consider the retainer," I said. "The partnership structure for Colborne. I'm open to discussing that. And the advisory seat, no." Helen didn't say anything for a moment. When she did, her voice was measured in the particular way that means she's not surprised, but wants me to be sure. "That's a significant position to walk away from?" "I didn't walk away from it," I said. "It was given to someone who didn't know what it was." She accepted that. Helen always accepts the things I've actually thought through. That afternoon, a man named Phil, a structural engineer in his late 50s who oversees the Dillsworth Pension Committee, texted to ask if I was starting something new. Then a message from a portfolio analyst I'd mentored at Callaway 3 years ago. Then one from Grant. "Heard there might be changes. Don't go anywhere." I wasn't going anywhere. Or maybe I was going somewhere different. I hadn't decided yet. What I'd begun to understand, sitting in my small office above the dry cleaner with the lake barely visible out the window, was that Colborne had never really been a contingency. It had been a mirror, a way of seeing clearly what was mine, not by title, not by inheritance, not by family, but by 30 years of showing up and knowing what to do when the market moved wrong. Sylvie came to the office that Friday. She called first, which I appreciated. She'd never been here before, and I watched her take in the small space, the 2 rooms, the functional furniture, the framed photograph of her mother and me at a conference in Halifax in 2003 that I've had on the wall here since I set up the office. She looked at the photograph for a moment. "I didn't know you had that one," she said. "Your mother gave me a copy." She sat down in the chair across my desk. She didn't look like the president of a capital firm in that moment. She looked like the version of herself from a long time ago, the one who thought carefully before she spoke. "I handled it badly," she said. "You did. I thought it would be cleaner. A clear transition, a clear signal. To the board, to everyone, that I wasn't there because of you." I looked at my daughter. She has worked hard her whole life to be seen as her own person, separate from my name and my connections. I understood that wanting more than she knew. "You weren't there because of me," I said. "You were there because you're good at this." The announcement was bad judgment, not bad credentials. Her jaw moved. She was holding on to something. "I need to know," she said quietly, "that you're not going to use Colborne to make things difficult." "I'm not. The clients, I will manage my relationships the same way I always have, professionally, in everyone's interest." She studied my face the way she used to do as a child when she was deciding whether to trust an answer. "The partnership the board proposed. I'm open to it." "On what terms?" "Fair ones. Colborne as primary strategic advisor, Callaway as administrator and compliance partner. The relationship I've built stays intact. We document it properly this time. And you, I stay where I am. Here." Something shifted in her face. Not relief exactly. More like the end of bracing for something. "You could have the advisory seat," she said. "I know. Don't you want it?" I thought about this honestly. The big office, the title on the door, the quarterly presentations, 30 years of those rooms. I built what I wanted to build. I said, "I don't need the chair to know what I contributed." Sylvie was quiet for a long moment. Then Mum would have had something to say about all of this. She would have. Probably would have sorted it out in about 20 minutes. 10, I said. She smiled. For a moment she looked so much like her mother that I had to look away, at the lake, at the middle distance, anywhere. We signed the partnership document 6 weeks later. Helen negotiated terms that were by any measure favorable to Colborne, a 5-year minimum performance thresholds and a clause that guaranteed my direct access to all senior institutional relationships. Callaway's legal team agreed to everything except one point, and then agreed to that too when Helen produced the original board minutes from 2016. Numbers don't argue, they simply exist. Sylvia and I have a standing lunch on the first Wednesday of each month now. We don't talk about the firm most of the time. We talk about her kids, my garden, the neighborhood in Oakville she's thinking of moving to. Small things. The things that don't get said during the years when everyone is too busy building. Owen shook my hand at the first joint advisory meeting. He was professional about it. I was professional about it. We may never entirely understand each other, and I think we've both made peace with that. Grant still calls me directly. He always will. I was standing at that same kitchen window a few months after everything settled, watching the neighbor's dog do his Thursday rounds, when it occurred to me what my wife had actually meant all those years ago at the sink. Make sure you're not the only one who gets hurt if it goes sideways. I used to think she meant protect yourself. Now I think she meant something else. Build something real enough that when it matters, the people around you can also find their footing. The coffee was still warm this time. I finished it standing there looking out at the ordinary street, the familiar rooftops, the thin line of lake just visible on a clear morning. There's a particular kind of quiet that comes after you stopped trying to hold something that's already found its shape. Not emptiness. Something steadier than that. I've been in this business long enough to know that the most important things are rarely the loudest. They're the structures you build when no one's watching, the relationships you tend without announcement, the mornings where the only measure of a good decision is that you can look at it clearly and know it was yours. The dog finished his digging, trotted back to his yard and disappeared behind the fence. I rinsed the cup and got back to work. I've been in this industry long enough to know that the most expensive lessons are the ones nobody thinks they need until they're already paying for them. When Sylvie called me that Thursday morning and told me I was being stepped back permanently, I didn't argue. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I'd already said it 8 years earlier in an addendum that nobody bothered to read. That's the thing about preparation. It doesn't announce itself, it just sits there, quietly waiting for the moment when it matters. I think about what I did when I built Coldborn Advisory, and I want to be honest about what it was and what it wasn't. It wasn't revenge, it wasn't scheming. It was the result of a simple, clear-eyed understanding that in any organization, family or otherwise, the people who hold the relationships are not always the people who hold the titles. I had watched that gap widen for years. I chose to be on the right side of it. That's what I've come to think of as the practical side of integrity. Not the version you announce in speeches, but the kind that shows up in the detail work, in the contracts you structure carefully, the clients you call back when you said you would, the commitments you keep even when no one is checking. Grant has been calling the same number for 20 years because I always picked up. That's not a strategy. It's just what you do when you take your word seriously. What I didn't expect, and what I've had to sit with since, is how much intelligence it actually requires to stay patient. There were years when I could have pushed harder for the recognition I felt I'd earned. I didn't, partly out of respect for the firm, partly because I understood that the moment you start performing for acknowledgement, you stop doing the work that earns it. The structure I built quietly, with board approval and clean paperwork, was only possible because I'd spent years paying close attention to how things actually worked rather than how they were supposed to work. You can't build something that holds under pressure unless you understand what pressure looks like before it arrives. And the persistence, the getting up and doing it anyway, the 30 years of cold calls and rebalancing meetings and clients who were unreasonable and markets that didn't cooperate, that's just the cost of building anything real. There's no shortcut through it. I know men who were smarter than me who burned out in the first decade because they thought intelligence was enough on its own. It isn't. You have to be willing to keep going on the mornings when the reasons feel thin. Sylvie is good at what she does. She made a mistake in how she handled things, and she admitted it, and she moved forward. I respect that more than I would have respected a clean record with no hard lessons in it. Owen will learn eventually that the substance underneath a firm matters as much as the story told about it. Maybe more. What my wife understood long before I did was that the things worth protecting are rarely the ones with your name on the door. They're the ones you build carefully enough that they still stand when your name isn't on anything. I still have that photograph of her on the wall in the Lakeshore office. Some mornings I look at it before I start work. Then I get back to it.